Buddy Brown, and I want to thank Francis Gary Powell Jr. and especially George Mason University to recognize me, myself, an 83-year-old recce pilot. And
you don't look it.
But I want to make a slight correction to what you said about my entering the Air Force. I entered the Air Force in 1951. I was flying combat as a 23-year-old pilot out of K-13, Suwon, Korea. Back then, I only had 2 brain cells, one to eat and one to fly. So, but later on,
there was another one.
Now I have 3. And I noticed there's a bunch of people out there that is not as old as I am, but I think you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I don't want to forget this. I want to pass this on, and I'm going to get into the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that is that when you're older, get into the older age, you can buy your smoke detector that has a snooze button on it. So that will save your life sometimes. Well, anyway, after I finished my tour in Korea, I came back to the States to a fighter outfit, and about 1956, I was interviewed to fly a new type of aircraft, high altitude, long duration, requires the use of a pressure suit, and you'd only be in the program for about 18 months because I didn't know too much about 70,000 feet and long duration flights. Well, I ended up flying the U-2 for 8 years. I was a reconnaissance pilot for 15 years. And when the Cuban Missile Crisis broke, I had been flying the U-2 for 6 years, and so that was the first time that it started getting a lot of notoriety as far as the Air Force flying the U-2. The day that Steve Heiser flew the bird, it was on the 14th that he took off. Me and another pilot had been flown out to Edwards Air Force Base, North Base, which was a CIA base there at Edwards. And we were flown out there to get checked out in the CIA's U-2. Steve Heiser and Rudy Anderson had already been there previously and were checked out, and they were still there. The president or somebody in the government decided that the Cuban Missile Crisis, he wanted Air Force pilots to do the operation because if the CIA got shot down, they would be, there's some sort of a political thing about them being a spy, and we wouldn't be a spy, and so that was one of the reasons why the government wanted us to fly. During the conference, or during the we got together at North Base, the discussion really became heated, and the CIA did not want to give up their program, and I can understand why. We were excused. This other pilot, Jerry Macklemore, and myself were excused, along with the flight surgeon, Dr. Self. That next day, Sunday, which was the 14th, Steve Heiser, unbeknownst to both of us, that he had taken off early in the morning to fly the first Cuba mission. And that's the one he found at San Cristobal, the missiles being built up. We were flown back to Laughlin Air Force Base. I told our flight navigator shop that what was going on there, and they said, well, we have contingency plans, it's called Brass Knob, for Cuba missions. And they picked 4 pilots, myself, Jim Qualls, Roger Herman, George Bull, and myself to fly the mission on the 17th, the next morning, early, taking off at 0400 at 10-minute intervals. I'm going to go a little bit about the preparation to fly a U-2. It's not like flying a fighter. You kind of kick a tire, walk around it, and jump in the cockpit, and off you go. And the U-2, the difference is that we were briefed that we were going to fly the mission the next day, and that was the Tuesday. They issued me a sleeping pill. They issued us sleeping pills because you go to bed early in the different times of the day, and the pill, if I recall, was called Tuinol or something. It put you to sleep real fast, it wore off real fast. We were woke up about 11 o'clock at night and reported down to PSD, Physiological Support Division, to start our process of getting ready to fly the U-2. The process is, the first thing you do is the flight surgeon will grab you, and he did this on every flight, before and after you flew. He give you a quick physical. Eyes, nose, ears, blood pressure, temperature, and he knew you better than anybody else. And the pressure suit that he wore was called a partial pressure suit, and it took about 150 measurements to tailor-made to each person's body, and so it fit you and nobody else. And the fire surgeon watched you very close. If your blood pressure was 125 and it's normally 120, if your temperature was a little high, like maybe a cold coming on, you would be grounded. You wouldn't fly that flight, and your backup pilot would fly. If you gained a couple of pounds, you wouldn't fly because you couldn't get in your pressure suit. So that was they watched you very close. After you did that, you got a high-protein diet with steak and eggs, and you got coffee and orange juice and stuff like that. And then the PSB folks that made your breakfast and everything, they issued you what do you want to eat on your flight. And so you had tubes of food, the same thing the astronauts did early in their program. You had a little hole and you squeeze the stuff in. And I always took a couple of pints of orange juice for the added energy later on in the flight. After that was finished, you dressed. It took 2 people to dress you in this partial pressure suit. You got in the suit, they closed you up, bathed you to your seat kit, closed the faceplate on your helmet, and you sat down in a nice comfortable chair and you pre-breathed oxygen for 2 hours before you even got in the aircraft. During that pre-breathing time, the navigators would come in and the intelligence people would come in and brief you on your flight, what targets you're after, SAM missiles or what the threats might be, pickup areas if you went down, and just the whole gauntlet. And so the 2 hours you're pre-breathing, you're looking at your map and you're studying your targets and everything. Now, difference between the targets that we flew and what Tad did was that we flew from point A to point B, and we stayed on that course, and we had a camera that took about a 30-mile swath, where it had different modes, but we took about a 30-mile swath over Cuba, and we sucked up everything there. After that was finished, oh, by the way, the 2 hours of 100% oxygen, the reason for that was that you're purging your blood system of nitrogen. If you lost pressurization, there's an arbitrary line at 64,000 feet called the Armstrong line. If you lose pressurization above the Armstrong line, your blood boils. And so that's a no-no.
It boils if you have nitrogen in it, right?
Well, it will boil because it's a liquid. And it doesn't boil because of heat, it boils because of the partial pressure. The nitrogen, it can start coming out at max altitude. If you have it in there, you start getting the bends, just like a diver coming up too fast from a dive. Well, after that, then the PSD will pick you up, and Physiological Support Division, that PSD is called, and take you out to your aircraft. Now, I wanted to back up just a little bit of us waking up in the morning. When I say us, we didn't all sleep together. This is at my home, and each of their homes. I start hearing, like you're doing when you're half asleep, you're not really fully awake, but you're half asleep, but you can hear thunder in the background, and you see the lightning flashes and stuff like that. But we start having a thunderstorm, a Texas thunderstorm there. And I said, well, we're going to have some bad weather, but it'll probably fly through Del Rio or Laughlin Air Force Base before we get a chance to take off and everything. Well, it started getting worse and worse and worse. On the way down to PSD to get our briefing and start our briefing process, the lightning and thunder and the rain was really horrific. And I said, well, there's no way they're going to execute this mission before us.
This is the mission of the 17th, right?
This is the mission of the 17th.
17th. So can we hold that? Because on the 14th, Heiser's mission, he had flown, he took the initial photos, and we're going to get back to the 17th mission, but I want to proceed chronologically. Tell us about the 17th mission.